I was 40 feet away when I saw her mouth the word, and I have run protective details for 11 years without ever once needing to draw my sidearm. That afternoon, watching a royal guard do what I could not, I understood why some threats are stopped better by stillness than by force. My name is Rowan Aldis. I work the household's protective intelligence unit, the quiet office nobody photographs, the one that reads crowds before the crowds know they're being read. On the second Saturday of the summer garden fundraiser at the House of Everard, my job was simple: stand near the tea pavilion, watch 400 guests mill across the lawn, and flag anything wrong before it became a headline. Marquees striped the grass in cream and gold, a string quartet worked through something unhurried near the fountain, and waiters in white gloves threaded the crowd with trays of iced tea nobody was drinking fast enough in the July heat. I was not watching the gates. That was Guardsman Cassius Thorne's post, and in 3 years of running security for these events I had never once seen him need help. Thorne had stood ceremonial posts for 6 years, 2 at the main palace, 4 rotating through events like this one, where the guard becomes, for an afternoon, part of the scenery people pay to see. Most guests treated him exactly like scenery, posed beside him for photographs, tested his stillness with waved hands and loud voices, the way children test a locked door just to see if anything happens. Nothing ever did. That was the point of him. The woman came through the east gate at 2:30, 24, maybe 25, in a pale blue dress a size too formal for a garden party, her hand gripped just above the wrist by a broad-shouldered man in a charcoal suit who smiled at every steward they passed. He told the gate steward they were the Whitlocks, a name on the guest list, verified, waved through. He called her darling twice in the first 10 feet. I noted it and moved on, because charm is not a crime and I had 399 other guests to watch. Della Marsh, the steward working the guest book, told me afterward the pairing had bothered her too, though she couldn't have said what, the man's grip a shade too firm, the woman's smile arriving a half-second late as though summoned rather than felt. Della flagged nothing. There was nothing yet to flag. That is how these things work. The wrongness arrives in increments too small to name until someone finally puts a word to it. She looked at the guard. Guardsman Thorne stood his post at the inner arch between the forecourt and the garden proper, red tunic immaculate, rifle grounded, eyes fixed on the middle distance the way they train them to hold for hours without a flicker. Every guest who passed him got exactly nothing, no nod, no glance, no acknowledgement that he had noticed them at all. That is the discipline. That is the whole point of the uniform. But as the woman in blue passed within 3 feet of him, her eyes found his face and her lips moved. No sound, just shape. Help! I was watching through the gap in the pavilion canvas and I nearly missed it entirely. A single silent syllable, gone in under a second, swallowed by the man's hand tightening on her wrist and pulling her forward before she could so much as slow her stride. If I had blinked I would have lost it. Thorne did not blink. I found that out later when I finally got his account in writing, but I could see it even from 40 feet. Something in the stillness changed. Not a flinch. A focus. He let them pass. That was the first thing that told me this was not going to be an ordinary afternoon. Thorne did nothing. No hand raised, no word spoken, no break in the rigid 200 pounds of him standing exactly where regulation put him. The man in the charcoal suit steered the woman past the arch and onto the garden path, toward the side gate that led out to the visitor car park, and Thorne's eyes tracked them for exactly as long as protocol allowed a soldier's eyes to track anything, which is to say not at all by any measure an untrained observer would catch. But I was trained. I saw his weight shift 11 degrees onto his left foot. I saw his right hand, gloved and motionless at his side, curl a half-inch tighter around nothing. I moved toward the pavilion's edge to get a better line, already reaching for my radio, and that was when Thorne did something I had never seen a ceremonial post holder do in 11 years of running these events. He broke formation. Not dramatically, not with a shout. He simply stepped off the paving stone that marked his mark, the exact spot a guardsman stands for a 4-hour watch without moving, and fell into a walk that matched the pace of the crowd, unhurried, a man appearing to stretch his legs between duties. Nobody but me and I'd guess 3 other trained eyes on that lawn would have registered it as anything but routine. He crossed the garden at an angle that would intersect the side gate roughly 6 seconds before the couple reached it. I keyed my radio. Movement on Thorne's post, east arch unscheduled. Possible domestic situation, unverified guest pair moving toward the visitor gate. I did not wait for a response. I was already walking, faster now, cutting through a knot of guests admiring the rose beds, apologizing to no one. The man in the charcoal suit, I would later learn his name was Desmond Cray, though that was not the name on the guest list, reached the gate first and turned to pull the woman through it. That was his mistake. Turning meant he had to stop, however briefly, and put his full attention on maneuvering her past the narrow iron frame. It gave Thorne the half-second he needed. The guardsman was suddenly simply asterisk there at the gate, a wall of red wool and iron discipline where a moment before there had been an empty path. He did not shout. He did not draw a weapon he was not carrying for civilian use. He placed himself between the gate and the car park beyond it, squared his shoulders, and said 4 words in a voice that carried the flat, unhurried authority of a man who has spent a career being obeyed without ever raising it. "The lady stays here." Cray's face went through 3 expressions in under 2 seconds: confusion, irritation, and then the particular ugly calculation of a man realizing his exit has just been blocked by someone he cannot simply push past. "This is a private matter," he said. "She's my fiancée. We're leaving." "She hasn't said a word," Thorne answered. "You have twice, that's the problem." I reached them 8 seconds later, my identification already out, and by then the situation had gone from quiet to charged in a way that 400 guests 40 feet away were beginning to notice, heads turning, conversation dying in patches across the lawn like a wave rolling backward. Cray's grip on the woman's wrist had gone from a practiced, casual-looking hold to something with real force behind it, his knuckles white, and I watched Thorne's gaze drop to that hand for exactly 1 beat before his eyes came back up to Cray's face. "Let go of her arm," Thorne said. "I don't answer to a guard in a costume." "You don't have to answer to me. You have to let go of her arm." What happened next took 11 seconds, and I clocked every one of them because I have testified about seconds like these before, and I know how much can hinge on getting the count right. Cray made the decision men like him always make eventually. He decided the guard was exactly what he looked like, a ceremonial ornament, a photograph prop, and that shoving past one meant nothing. He put his free hand flat on Thorne's chest and pushed. Thorne did not move an inch backward. What he did instead was take Cray's pushing hand at the wrist, the same practiced, economical motion I'd watched drilled into recruits at the regimental yard 100 times, a wrist lock that looks almost gentle from a distance and is not gentle at all, and turn it. Cray's own forward momentum did the rest, folding him down and sideways onto one knee on the gravel path, his other hand releasing the woman's wrist entirely as instinct overrode intention. She stumbled free and I caught her by the shoulders before she went down, already turning her away from the scene, already speaking low and calm the way we're trained to when someone's hands are shaking the way hers were. "You're safe," I told her, "you're safe." "What's your name?" "Vera," she said, and then, in a rush like she'd been holding it behind her teeth for an hour, "He's not my fiancé, I don't even know what he is anymore. He found me 3 days ago. He said if I didn't come with him quietly he'd my sister. He knows where my sister lives." I got the rest in the debrief room 20 minutes later, but the shape of it was already clear on the lawn. Vera Calloway had left a controlling relationship 8 months prior, moved twice, changed jobs, told almost no one where she'd gone. Cray had tracked her through a mutual acquaintance's social media and shown up outside her flat 3 days before the fundraiser, where she worked as a temporary events assistant for the catering company handling the household's summer bookings. He'd forced his way into escorting her to the event under threat against her sister, banking on a public setting to keep her compliant and quiet, the theory, common enough among men like him, being that a woman surrounded by 400 strangers in evening wear will not risk a scene. He had, until the moment her lips shaped one silent word to a man standing rigid and unreachable 40 feet away, been entirely correct that no one would notice. Della Marsh gave her own statement twice, once to me, once to the constables, describing the moment the same way each time, which investigators tend to trust. She'd looked up from the guest book in time to see a royal guard leave his post at a dead walk, and her first thought, she admitted, was that he was about to be disciplined for it. Her second thought 30 seconds later was that she had never in 4 years of working these events seen anyone put a man on the ground so quietly. She said the string quartet never even stopped playing. Thorne kept Cray on the ground with the wrist lock held at exactly the tension needed to prevent movement and not 1 degree more. I checked the angle later, when the household solicitor asked me to write up the use of force assessment, and it was textbook proportionate, the kind of restraint that looks almost courteous next to what Cray had been doing to Vera's wrist for the better part of an hour. 2 constables from the garden's discreet security detail reached them within 30 seconds of my radio call, cuffed Cray, and read him his cautions while he was still on one knee insisting, to no one who believed him, that this was a misunderstanding between engaged people. It was not a misunderstanding. By the time the local magistrate's office processed the arrest that evening, Cray's name came back attached to 2 prior restraining orders from 2 different women in 2 different cities, both filed and both, it turned out, never properly enforced because he'd moved jurisdictions each time before a court date landed. Vera's statement, backed by 3 days of her own frantic, deleted then recovered text messages to her sister, was the piece that finally stuck. He was held without bail pending a hearing, and the fictional household solicitor, a woman named Priscilla Yu who has handled worse in her time, personally walked the paperwork to make sure this arrest, unlike the others, would not simply evaporate at a border crossing. Thorne's commanding officer, a major named Isolde Farrow, reviewed the incident footage that same evening. Every event on the household calendar runs on discrete perimeter cameras, and I sat with her while she watched it twice through without comment. Command of a ceremonial regiment does not go to people who telegraph their feelings. But she ran the tape a 3rd time, froze it on the frame where Thorne's weight first shifted, 3 full seconds before anything else on the lawn had changed, and said only, "That's not reaction, that's a man who was already watching." She signed off on the use of force report without a single amendment, which I was told happens perhaps twice a year. I want to be precise about what Thorne did after, because it is the part that stayed with me longer than the 11 seconds of the takedown. Once the constables had Cray in hand, and Vera was seated on a garden bench with a cup of tea someone had pressed into her shaking hands, Thorne returned to his post. Not immediately, he waited until she looked steady, until I gave him a small nod that said she's all right, go, and then he walked back across the lawn, resumed the exact paving stone he had left and stood, rifle grounded, eyes forward. 400 guests who had just watched a man in a red tunic put a stranger on his knee in 11 flat seconds now watched him become once again entirely unreadable. No triumph in his face, no adrenaline showing through. Just the same iron composure that had been there before any of it started, as though the interruption had cost him nothing at all. I asked him afterward, off the record, guardsman to protective officer, one professional to another, how he'd caught a single silent word from 40 feet with his eyes locked dead ahead the way regulation demands. "You don't watch with your eyes only," he said. "You watch with what's at the edge of them. Regulation says look forward, it never said look blind." I wrote that down, I still have it. Vera Calloway spent that night in a safe placement, the household arranged through a partner charity, one of the quieter services these grand public events fund without ever putting on a program. Her sister was contacted and warned within the hour. Local police in her sister's city increased patrols near the address for 2 weeks as a precaution. I checked in on her a month later because that is also the job, the part that happens after the radios go quiet. She had relocated again, this time with an actual safety plan behind her instead of just a suitcase and hope, and she asked me almost shyly whether I could pass along a message to the guard who'd stood there. The household made one quiet change after that Saturday, and it is the only part of this I was asked to help write into policy. Every guardsman posted to a public event now receives a short briefing, 10 minutes, on the kind of signal a person in danger might risk when they cannot risk a word, a held glance, a mouthed syllable, hands that grip a bag or a sleeve too tightly to be casual. Thorne did not need the briefing. He'd apparently been watching for exactly that his whole career, on instinct no manual had ever given him a name for. But Major Farrow decided that instinct like his shouldn't have to be rare, and the training now carries his name attached to it in the internal records, quietly, the way the household marks most things that matter. I delivered it myself, on a gray Tuesday when Thorne was off the ceremonial roster and drilling recruits at the yard instead. I told him a woman named Vera wanted him to know she was safe, that she'd started a new position, that she'd kept the folded napkin from the tea someone gave her that afternoon because it was, she said, the first thing anyone had handed her in 3 days that wasn't an order. Thorne did not smile exactly. I'm not sure I ever saw him smile in 3 years of crossing paths at these events, but something eased fractionally at the corner of his mouth, there and gone the way most things about him were there and gone. Good, he said, just that. Then he turned back to the recruits waiting at attention on the yard, squared his own shoulders, and resumed the business of teaching young men and women how to stand so still that the world forgets to be afraid of them, until without warning, without a raised voice, without ever losing the stillness that got them there in the first place, they decided it is time to stop being still at all. I have run protective details for 11 years, and I have never forgotten those 11 seconds on the garden path or the 4 words that started them. The lady stays here, not a threat, Not even really a warning. Just a fact stated by a man whose whole life had trained him to make facts out of silence, and to prove them when it mattered faster than anyone watching thought a statue could move.